Okay, we are continuing on the conversation of the ecclesiological continuum. So now that we explored briefly the sacramental end, let's go to the other end of your continuum where I asked you to write the word congregational. In this ecclesiology, the church is understood quite differently. Here, the church is formed when 2 or 3 people are gathered together. Christ is present and the church is created. The agency, then, is the gathering of people together. Involvement in this type of church is not simply by participation through adoption, but it comes by testifying to a personal decision to put faith in Jesus for salvation and a decision to believe as the congregation believes and then become a member. The ultimate place where decisions for the church are made is the congregation, not a bishop. By vote of the congregation, a board or administrative committee is formed to govern. But ultimately, the authority, the final authority, accrues to the people in their vote. Pastors are not appointed, but are called to the congregation by the vote of the people after a search and candidates are examined. Instead of sacraments, these churches generally celebrate rites, not R-I-G-H-T, as in something you automatically deserve, but R-I-T-E, a ceremonial act or procedure. Communion is a memorial that doesn't use elements, but it uses emblems. It is a moment to recall what Jesus did historically, whereas in the sacramental churches, they are living it and identifying with it in remembrance. Baptism in more congregational churches is also a rite. It publicly indicates a decision that was made by the individual to accept Jesus into their heart and announces that to the whole community. Usually in a more free church or congregationally structured church, infant baptism is not practiced at all and can even be considered heretical. Baptism is based solely upon the decision a person makes to align with Jesus. In a congregational pattern of thinking, there is really no magisterium or higher level of agreed upon authority that guides the church. Each church is expected to develop a statement of faith. The extent to which that statement of faith is aligned with Christian orthodoxy or historic sound belief in our Christian tradition, that's completely up to the congregation's vote. Clearly, the pastor should be key in shaping that, assuming that they've been trained theologically. You can sort of see a vast difference in these two extremes on your continuum. It's the reason why many times some folks use a capital C in referring to the church and others use a small c. I remember early in the year 2000 when I convened leaders of all traditions in America to meet with me in Washington to develop what became known as a Christian Declaration on Marriage. My hope was to issue a strong declaration to the nation for the new century on how Christians regard marriage as sacred, God's first institution between a man and a woman for life. I included the U.S. Catholic bishops. I included the mainline churches and the National Council of Churches, the Southern Baptist Convention, since they were not a member of any group, and I, of course, represented American evangelicals. After completing numerous meetings and finishing what was a powerful statement to the nation on marriage, I remember getting a call from the head of the Southern Baptists just before we released it to the public press in Washington. He asked me to adjust the final work by changing the capital C on church to a small c throughout the 2-page document. Well, we had a spirited conversation as I was driving on the freeway, and finally he conceded for the sake of unity in the project. It remained a capital C. Amazing how significant ecclesiology can be, even in what seems to be the small things. So, with all of that, you probably wonder, where does the Free Methodist Church fall on this continuum? Well, that's a great question. That's where we're headed. Remember that hash mark I asked you to put in the middle of this continuum? Well, Using that as your starting point, move about halfway from that middle point toward the sacramental side of your continuum and put an X. That's about where the Free Methodist Church lands. Now, some may push it a little one way or the other, but that is the general area where we are as a church family. Let me try to show you why. You may have heard Free Methodist leaders say that we are a modified episcopacy. That just means that our church structure is episcopal in nature. Episcopal just means that we have bishops and the structure that goes along with that office, which is more sacramental in nature. But we are not entirely episcopal. We have modified it somewhat to correct for some things in our founding that seem to cause difficulties. Remember how the early Methodist Episcopal ministers controlled decisions and did so in secret societies? Well, we modified that by saying that we will have equal lay and clergy balance at every level of our denominational structure. Remember how the bishop would appoint pastors unilaterally, and sometimes it was used to show favoritism or maybe to silence some? We modified that by making appointments by a stationing committee, which is later known as the Ministerial Appointments Committee, that included equal lay and clergy members and was chaired by the bishop. Remember how we talked about the constitution of the Free Methodist Church and even the rest of the Book of Discipline? Well, that is somewhat of our magisterium, to which we appeal to keep connection and authority clear. We don't have a statement of faith. We start with the premise that we are classic Christians, as Wesley says. We write what are called an article of religion only as we need to in order to respond to what the church confronts, so as to keep it aligned with historic orthodoxy and Christian tradition. Recall how our current articles of religion actually came from the 39 original articles of religion of the Anglican Church and have stood the test of time? Today in the Free Methodist Church, we practice infant baptism when parents request it, on the same premise and understanding as the more sacramental churches. When that infant comes of age, they are asked to affirm their faith in the questions for membership in the Free Methodist Church. It's sort of our own confirmation. But they are not required to be rebaptized in order to be a member. We do have local boards and committees that guide the local church, but the pastor is appointed by the denomination through its annual conference. The pastor is not amenable to the local church board, but to the annual conference through the superintendent under the guidance of the bishop. Of course, this doesn't mean that the pastor can ignore the local board. The relationship the pastor has needs to be accountable to the local board for the local function and activity of the church in that place. Her or his amenability for appointment, character, conduct, and the fulfillment of ordination vows is to the denomination. We don't have 7 sacraments, but we have 2. Communion, or Eucharist, is one. We don't hold to transubstantiation, where actually turning the elements turning into the actual blood and body of Jesus. But we do believe that the elements of the bread and the cup become for us the body and blood of Christ. It is much more than a simple time to recall what Jesus did. We invite people to internalize Christ in the act of taking the elements. It is a means of grace, a way a person may actually accept the immanent grace of God that is very present. Likewise, baptism is a sacrament. We don't just see it as a celebratory moment when a person announces that they have accepted Jesus. It is a sacred moment of deep identification with Jesus in being woven into the fabric of God's family and kingdom through death and new life. Christ is very, very present. So, you see, we have some elements of a more congregational ecclesiology, but largely we tilt toward the sacramental side. Now, some may ask, are we evangelical? Yes, we are. But so are many denominations that are on the other end of the continuum. And so are many people who are farther toward the sacramental side. You'll find evangelicals across this entire continuum. That's because evangelicals don't have a theology. Now, I know that sounds like a radical statement, and I realize I use it to get your attention a bit. Got me in a bit of trouble when I said that at a press conference while in leadership of the evangelical movement. Imagine the awkwardness. In reality, though, being evangelical is more of a missiological or even a sociological matter. There are lots of evangelicals in highly sacramental churches and congregational churches alike. It's not about the theology or the nature of the church. Evangelicals, roughly described, are people who are all about the evangel, the good news of salvation through Jesus. They have a high view of Scripture. They focus on the centrality and lordship of Christ. They emphasize a personal confession and relationship with Christ, and they have an inner impulse to share Christ through very missional activities. Those things can describe people in the Roman Catholic Church as easily as people in independent congregational churches. And it can describe people all across a wide array of theological streams. Our goal, then, is not to replicate another family or even try to become everything. We desire to be who we really are, formed by history, shaped by godly people before us. We have a clear identity. We have a last name. We are only able to tilt forward into our future as we embrace the identity of who we are in our very core. My hope and prayer is that as you pursue your role of leadership in the Free Methodist Church, you will reflect deeply on these things. Be permeable to become firmly rooted in this identity and embrace the confidence it provides in leading well from a humble posture of belonging to this family. Remember your last name. Now go live like it.